digital isn't new anymore, but there's a lot of still emerging technologies. You mentioned VR. We're talking a lot about visual technology. And so it's impossible to be an expert in everything.
Hi, this is Eric Jones with Velocitize. I'm joined with Raashi Rosenberger from Pinterest. Welcome.
Nice. Thanks. Nice to be here.
We had done a study where we looked at the generations and some type of even generational divides among them. We noticed a marked shift between even millennials and Gen Z around a change from inform me to entertain me, which is a little bit what you're talking about with flow state. How do brands need to kind of rethink their digital experiences to tap more into that mindset as opposed to most the original websites were really just paper put in digital format. And how do you advise people to kind of rethink their digital experiences in that way?
Yeah, so on Pinterest, what we see is that context is one of the most critical parts of the entire experience. So when someone comes onto Pinterest, they're in this very receptive mode. We see that there's a lot of intent and they're really engaged and they're open to new ideas. And so what we see is with that context, as someone is scrolling through their feed, when they get little bits of content, that content needs to be thoughtful of the context that the user is either browsing, discovering, or searching. And it also needs to be thoughtful of what is the previous behavior of that person. And so for Pinterest, we see that if you combine the context with the content, you actually are able to get to this really sweet spot where you're being useful as a brand and you're not being a distraction. And so I think that in that way, Pinterest is actually a very different platform than a lot of the other digital channels out there because people are coming to the experience with this intent. And as long as the brand considers the context, what the audience is doing, what they're searching for, how they're engaging, then they're going to actually have a really nice product that matches up pretty closely to what the consumer is looking for.
We're seeing an evolution in terms of how we all interface with technology. The rise of VR, the rise of voice as a way to engage with technology. Getting away from keyboards, getting away from mice. Certainly Pinterest is, a very human way to think about things. It's visual. How do you think about personalization, against that context of visualization and kind of serving up more personalized experiences for your users?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that we see is that a lot of people are talking about what the world is going to look like when the keyboard is gone. And so at Pinterest, we have this hypothesis, this belief really, that ultimately the camera is going to be the new keyboard. So everything is visual. And what we do is we start to take all of the visual pieces of information and data that we have on the Pinterest platform, and we're able to aggregate that into something that we call the taste graph. And what that taste graph does is it starts to help actually connect visual cues with individual people's taste and preference. And so when you think about all of that coming together, what you get is something actually quite magical and I think very special. So as we think about personalization, all of these elements of computer vision, artificial intelligence technology, all of these visual inspired technologies are going to come together. And what we see is that's actually going to be the way the future is, right? That's how people are going to start to perceive their preference and their taste. And that's actually going to be the way people expect to have information served to them.
You did an amazing integration with Campbell's. Kind of marrying the digital with the physical around Thanksgiving. I believe it was a year ago, for which you won a coveted Cannes Lion award. I wonder if you could talk about that brand activation and maybe some of the other activations that you've done where you have done this wonderful blending of the physical with the digital.
Yeah, definitely. So the campaign that you're referring to was a really fantastic partnership with Campbell's, the brand. And so what we did was, it was called the Recipe Reality Check. So the Campbell's Recipe Reality Check is essentially an experience where as someone is scrolling on Pinterest, they get a a piece of content, a pin, and it's if someone has engaged in food content and if it seems like they're recipe planning, they see a pin that's sponsored by Campbell's. They click through, and what happens is you can actually authenticate your Pinterest at your Pinterest account, and you can sync the two experiences. So what Campbell's does then is it reads all of the different pins that you have saved. So say, for example, I have saved a chicken pot pie recipe that takes an hour and a half and it has 20 different ingredients. What the experience does is it says, here's the recipe that you've saved, and then here is the Campbell's easier version. So I think that what's really lovely about that particular campaign is it's a really smart insight. Campbell's knows that their mom audience is on Pinterest, and they also know that their particular audience is strapped for time. They don't have enough time, and so what we created was like this very utilitarian experience to help those consumers move forward and actually go take action in the real world instead of just saving a bunch of ideas without doing them. So really excited about that particular experience, and I will note that that was a wonderful collaboration with the agency BBDO. So our creative team at Pinterest worked very closely with BBDO to bring that to life, and Campbell's was just a fantastic partner to work with. Another example that does something similar, where it actually gets people in the real world, is some work that we've been doing with the Home Depot. So last September, the Home Depot launched this experience called Built-in Pins. So this was a Pinterest-first experience where they actually built content that showed users on the Pinterest platform how to get all the way from the beginning of a home renovation till the end of a renovation. So Home Depot had done research that showed them that people were really excited and inspired by the idea of a renovation, but then had a lot of anxiety about actually doing it and taking the steps to make it happen. And so what they wanted to show is, here is this perfect renovation, and here are all the individual steps to go achieve it, and it's not as hard as you think it might be.
You've been, both in-house and also worked at various agencies. One of the things that we've been seeing with P&G and various other, brands, they've been taking a lot more work in-house. What do you think's driving that? What changes are happening? What do agencies maybe even need to do differently?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first of all, I will say that my background of being on the agency side, so I was at Gray before Pinterest, and I was at Razorfish for a really long time before then. And the years that I spent on the agency side were just incredible in terms of the ability to learn different clients' businesses and get an understanding of a lot of different types of work and marketing challenges. That's something that I think is just really important for people to understand. So the industry is changing for sure. I think what we've started to see is, if you think about agency side and then brand side, and then even platform side sort of at the top, you see that there's these three circles, and they're starting to come more and more together. So there's just a lot more overlap that's happening. So we're starting to see that brands feel like they can take some of these capabilities in-house. We're starting to see that that platforms are starting to take creative in situations where they work closely in partnership with the creative teams, but they're also starting to play in that space a little bit more. What I think is really interesting is that as these experiences become shared, as this overlap becomes a little bit more, the end output actually becomes better. It holds people a little bit more accountable because you have a better understanding. There was a time where digital was new, like maybe 10, 15 years ago. And digital isn't new anymore, but there's a lot of still emerging technologies. You mentioned VR. We're talking a lot about visual technology. And so it's impossible to be an expert in everything. And so what we're starting to see is it's important to just have a baseline understanding of the industry, but more and more having different types of specialties and expertise is going to be important. But also this idea of having a shared understanding of what the challenges of your partner is will also be important, because it helps you do better work at the end of the day. Cool.
Thanks so much, Raashi. It was a pleasure having you on today.
Thank you.